I despise my mentally handicapped sister. Hear me out. My sister is severely autistic. She requires attention almost 24/7 and cannot be left alone. She is nonverbal and cannot take care of herself at all. Despite the fact that she is only 12, she is extremely destructive and violent and destroys anything she gets her hands on. I hate her. That should be wrong to say, but it doesn't feel like it. I was only 6 years old when she was born, and since then I've never solely had my parents' attention. Even since I can remember, the world has revolved around her. I was moved out of my room into the basement at 7 because she needed to be in the room next to my parents. All of my toys as a child were destroyed by her, and my parents simply ignored me when I complained. Even when I was 14 and she destroyed a Mac my school gave me, I was in the wrong. Along with this, I am expected to take care of her and drop everything I do for her. I can never make plans with friends because my parents expect me to be there if they need me to take care of her. Even when I do somehow get time to myself, I am required to leave if they need me. If I do not, then I am punished. The recent example of this is when I went to see the new Spider-Man movie, and was grounded because I turned my phone off in the theater. It seems as if I am nothing more than a slave to them, and anything involving her simply overshadows me. This last week I was chosen to give a speech at a school event. I was so excited, and my parents promised to be there, but they never showed and claimed it was because of my sister. Anytime anything like this happens for me, they are too busy with her. I've held this in for so long, and it finally spilled out today. While talking about colleges with my father, he joked that I should get a degree that pays well so when they're gone I can take care of my sister. I don't know why, but this caused me to break down. I cried and screamed about how it was always about her. I'm nothing more than a caretaker to them, that they always make it about her, and that I'm expected to be her slave for the rest of my life. I've locked myself in my room since then, and my parents have not come to check on me. Am I the asshole here? Update: I despise my mentally handicapped sister. Hear me out. Turns out, I don't despise my sister. It's not her fault that she was born the way she is. My parents came to talk to me a while after my breakdown, but I was unable to bring myself to talk to them and only cried and asked them to leave. They have made arrangements with my grandfather for me to stay with him for the time being, and I'm getting ready to go to his house. My parents want to talk to me, but we have decided it's best I leave for now to have some space and time to collect myself. We will be sitting down and talking later this week about this issue. I've been staying with my grandfather. The week's been honestly a huge change for me, for better and for worse. I started by telling my grandpa the story of why I broke down the way I did, and to be honest, he seemed horrified. No one in my family knew my parents were using me as essentially a free care service for my sister. My grandpa told me that my sister is supposed to be getting care from a professional and that my parents were ignoring that. Along with this, I was not supposed to be caring for her at all with her mental state, as apparently she is a danger to herself and others. With everything else I told him, along with stuff like the movie incident, he was really mad and told me to not contact my parents without him there. He pretty much told me that he would be meeting with my parents beforehand and that he was going to be there when I sat down with them. It didn't end here either. The rest of the week consisted of other family checking in on me and telling me things my parents hid from me. This included the fact that my parents have been taking money from the family to fund a caretaker that doesn't exist. This week has been rough. But the upside is that even through all this, my extended family has been giving me more love than I've felt in a while. My grandfather spent this last week making up for the time I've lost, encouraging me to spend time with friends and do things I want to do. My aunts and uncles have also been helping me through the week. Well, Saturday night I sat down with my parents to talk. It went badly, to say the least. They came clean to me about everything. They told me things, but they did not apologize. My parents still claim that I somehow owed my sister my time. My father even saying, "You were put here to be her caretaker." I won't lie and say I was composed. After everything I learned, I confronted them on the fact that my sister needed a caretaker, the money my dad was taking from his sister, and a few other things. They denied it or made excuses. And in the end, we ended off in a worse place than before. Today will be my last time talking to them for a while. After talking with my grandfather and uncle last night, I'm not going back. Later today I'm going there and picking up my stuff and moving in with my grandfather. When I graduate high school, I'm planning on leaving the state to go to school. My aunt has told me that the money she was sending my dad will instead be coming to me from now on. My parents have called me twice since Saturday. Neither of them were to apologize and only ask when I was coming home. I won't be going back to them. Right now I still feel pretty uneasy about everything, but I feel like that will pass. The rest of my family is showing their support to me, and honestly, it feels great. But in the end I lost my parents. Over all of this, I've learned something that I wished I saw earlier. I don't hate my sister. In fact, I love her with all my heart. I should never have projected my hate onto her. That was wrong, and someday I hope to make up for it. But for now I need to leave. We just got back from moving my things out of my parents' house. Everything I wanted to take my grandpa and uncle helped move, and it's at my grandpa's house now. I have my birth certificate, social security card, and every other document and record I could think of. My parents were quiet the whole time I was there. Shortly after I arrived, my dad left with my sister, and my mom only hovered over us silently as I moved. It took a while, but as we left she broke down and told me she loved me and would miss me. I hugged her and said goodbye, and that was it. Even now I sit here and think if she really meant it. After this whole week of her not saying anything, she waited till the end. I hope she meant it. Right now though, I think I just need to look ahead. Maybe one day me and my parents can reconnect. I hope so. Will I come back? I don't know. But for now I'm going to move on. I hope to see you on the other side. See you, Space Cowboy. Guy takes advantage of my little sister's disability, and I snap. My little sister, Holly, is mute. She can actually whisper a little, but it takes a lot of effort on her part. She's been mute ever since she was 5, when she lost her ability to speak in an accident. She's very smart, and she's a good-looking kid. At the time of these events, she was 16, and I was 21. Me and my sister live together in an apartment, because my mother is a roamer who isn't well suited to take care of a teenager. She has our twin kid siblings, but not my sister and I. My dad is distant from the family, so helping my sister through high school falls to me. I get paid just enough to get by. Because of our relatively poor living situation and my sister's inability to speak, she gets bullied at school. Generally it isn't much of a problem, but in the few months leading up to these events she was having increased problems with it. At the time, Holly was 16, but she was a sophomore in high school due to failing a year in middle school. Because she's good looking, and is older than most of her class, she gets attention from juniors and seniors. It's mostly negative attention, but there was one guy, Dio, who treats her really nicely. He's a senior and at this time is 18. He repels bullies from her, because he's a tall, handsome, tough guy, and bullies don't want to mess with him. I don't interfere with them because my sister is visibly happy when she comes home from school and whenever she's around him. I didn't let them hang out alone together, but supervised them hanging out a few times. A few months, and she stops coming home happy. She isn't hanging out with him anymore either, and although I ask her multiple times, she won't tell me anything about it. I confront him about it, and he evades the topic. At this point I'm suspicious, but I don't know what to be suspicious of. I'm getting more and more worried about Holly, so I go to her counselor and assistant principal to ask about her activities at school. From what I learn, she still spends all her free time near Dio at school. I find this strange, since she doesn't seem happy anymore. This is where the illegal stuff starts. A few days later, I invited Holly and Dio on a dinner night to Olive Garden. While we're there I do two things that are completely illegal. I steal his phone and I read his texts and emails. Anything I can to find out what's happened between them. I don't find what I'm looking for, but I do find out that he drinks and smokes Ed with his friends on weekends. A few days later I find his phone in the laundry, and said it must have ended up in one of our coats by accident. I know for a fact he got it back, because he called me to thank me for having Holly return it. I still didn't have what I was looking for, so I went back to the school, and used his previous texts as grounds to check CCTV for any suspicious activity. There wasn't anything suspicious by school standards, but there was something that caught my eye. It was my sister, going to the central bathroom in the school, and him going to the boys' room of the same bathroom about a minute later. The bathrooms are separated by a wall, but there's a janitorial closet that opens into both bathrooms and is completely in the blind zone of anyone walking into the bathrooms, let alone the CCTV cameras. At this point, I began to suspect that something was happening between them in that bathroom. It was the only one with a closet like that, and if my memory serves me, the closet didn't have a proper lock. It just locked from the outside on both sides. Now that I suspected something, I confronted Holly about it. She broke down crying, and after 15 minutes of consoling, she shakily signed to me something that made my blood boil. Apparently, it was far worse than I expected. I had thought they were going in there and doing substances or something, since Dio was the kind of guy who would pull that kind of thing. As it turns out, according to Holly, he brought her in there one day, closed the doors, held her down, and roped her. He told her that he would know if she told anyone, and he would hurt her if she did. Because she physically could not scream for help, or make any kind of loud noise for that matter, he got away with it. And the worst part is, he was threatening her into meeting him there every couple of days and doing that to her. I was livid. My first instinct was to call the police, but I realized that there was no evidence except the testimony of a mute girl. I wouldn't be satisfied with police intervention anyway. The first thing I did was call Holly in for a week from school. The next thing I did was find out where he lived. After that, I planned the most brutal revenge I could think of. My first step was to break into his house. It turns out his parents go out a lot, and he leaves to smoke and drink with his friends. I knew from reading his text that there was a spare key on top of the porch light in the backyard. That Saturday, I scoped out the place, and waited for everyone to leave. I then began phase 1 of my revenge. I went into his house through the back door, and found his room. I smashed his PC, stole his wallet, and pissed on his bed. Then I poorly hid 2 small bags of Ed in his house. Finally, to hide the fact that it was targeted, I tossed up the rest of the house, but didn't take anything. I then went to a Starbucks and used the Wi-Fi and Dio's debit card to purchase a bunch of intimacy toys in his name and send them to his house. I then left his wallet sitting near a homeless man sleeping on a park bench. Next, I contacted his parents and told them I had seen their son drinking and smoking with a group of teenagers. They were furious, which leads me to believe that wasn't the first time something like that had happened. Finally, I went to the back road he walked on his way home from his drinking parties, which I had found out in a text from one of his friends. I waited for 2 hours in some bushes for him to walk by, and then jumped him. I demanded his money and phone, although I knew he didn't have his wallet. I kept one hand in my hoodie pocket, pointing it like I had a GN, which he believed. He handed over his phone and ran away. I then finished up my plan by using his phone to send an email to the school from his school email, confessing to roping my sister in the janitorial closet multiple times, as well as possessing substances on school grounds and drinking alcohol when he was underage. Then I snapped his phone on my knee and went home. Afterwards my sister went back to school the following Monday, armed with a can of mace I bought her. Dio wasn't at school, and she was called in by her counselor. She confessed, and he was charged with rope, underage drinking, and illegal substance possession. On top of that, his parents completely disowned him, and he was expelled from the school. Sadly, this story doesn't have a completely happy ending. This whole ordeal sent Holly into a downward spiral. Her grades fell behind, and she barely smiled. In March of 2018, she attempted suicide by cutting herself, and it was pure luck that I found her in time. She's getting better now, but the emotional trauma will probably affect her for life. I pray to whatever cruel gods are out there that he gets a taste of his own medicine in prison. A friend set up my dad and he was nearly beaten to death. My grandfather got revenge on everyone involved. My dad was 17 at the time. The area he grew up in was in the UK and was a stereotypical working-class town. The part of town my family lived in was run down, full of poor families and had its fair share of crime, but it was close-knit and everyone knew everyone. My dad wasn't the most well-behaved kid, and he had hated being at school, but aside from a speeding ticket he had never been in trouble with the police. He was, and still is, a really talented musician and had a very active social life. For his 17th birthday one of his friends Dave had bought him a leather jacket with a very specific logo on it. According to my dad it was a rare and quite expensive motorcycle jacket. He was extremely happy that Dave had got it for him. Dave had bought himself the same jacket a while before and it was a big surprise. My grandmother apparently joked that with the jackets on they looked like twins and she wasn't far wrong. A few days after my dad's birthday, he was leaving work as a bartender in the town center at around 10 p.m. As he was getting close to where his bike was parked, a gang of 5 men approached him from behind. The last thing my dad remembers was being smacked over the head and passing out as he hit the floor. These men beat up my dad with bike chains and a crowbar, literally to within an inch of his life. Luckily 2 bouncers from a nearby pub had heard the commotion and rushed to help. The men ran off, the bouncers called the cops and my dad was taken to hospital. It turned out that Dave had quite a substantial gambling habit and owed a large amount of money to people who you really didn't want to owe money to. They had threatened Dave and told him that they would be looking for him to teach him a lesson. So Dave decided to set up my dad to take the beating instead of himself, or at least lessen his chances of taking it. He had bought my dad the same jacket because these guys knew that was what he wore when he rode. He then arranged for a guy he knew to find out when my dad left work and call up the loan sharks to let them know where Dave was. What a scumbag. My grandfather and grandmother were obviously distraught about this whole thing. The first thought on my grandfather's mind was if my dad would survive. When that was answered, his second was how best to get revenge. My grandfather was a lifelong boxer and a career military man. He enlisted at the back end of World War II at 17, stayed in the forces through Korea and then served in Malaya and Burma as a scout and sniper during the mid to late 1950s. He only reluctantly retired when my dad was little and worked as an engineer after his discharge. This guy was a certified badass even into his 50s, and although he wasn't the best husband or father at times, he could never stand by and watch his family get hurt. The first move my grandfather made was to call up every ex-service buddy, bouncer, pub landlord etc. that he knew and even a few less than legit characters he knew from the pubs. In my town word traveled fast, and my grandfather was well liked and had a bit of a reputation, so it wasn't long before he had the names and addresses of the 5 men who had attacked my dad. Apparently these guys had been bragging about beating up a defenseless man from behind. These guys were career criminals with violent reputations, but my grandfather really didn't give a poop who or what they were. My grandfather then called up a few of the most dangerous, hardened guys he knew from the service. He explained to them what had happened and they were all happy to help. One night, the group kicked in the doors of each thug and beat them to a pulp, all 5 of them. They knew that if they hit one, the others would hear about it and run, so they hit all 5 of them in one night. My grandfather knew that no one would call the police in the area they lived in. Talking to the cops was a big no-no in that area back then, so there was little chance of being caught. All 5 guys ended up bloodied with broken bones, shattered teeth, and the requirement to be fed from a tube by the end of the night. One of them had to be put into a medically induced coma. Of course, the police interviewed all of them in hospital when they sufficiently recovered, but none of them talked, both out of fear of my grandfather and fear they would be labeled as rats, and nothing came of it. But my grandfather wasn't done there. My grandfather used his connections in the clubs and bars to start spreading rumors about why they had been beaten up. Soon it had gotten round that these 5 guys had effed up, and had beaten up the wrong person. Not only that, but they had bragged about it and lied to whoever they worked for about it. Not only were they physically broken, but my grandfather ruined their credibility so that when they got out no one, criminal or otherwise, wanted to be associated with them. Once this was all done, my grandfather turned his attention to Dave. He had specifically left Dave for last, knowing that he would poop himself, knowing that my grandfather knew what he had done. My grandfather, however, was much more subtle in dealing with Dave, as he thought that a simple beating would be too good for him. He waited and asked around, and it turned out that Dave was not only a compulsive gambler but also had recently turned into a heavy substance addict as well. My grandfather found out who he was buying his substances from, when he would usually buy and where. He had a buddy of his follow Dave when he went to buy his stuff, follow him to where he was living and let my grandfather know. My grandfather then called in an anonymous tip that there was a huge substance deal going on at the address and he thought he heard gene shots. He got 2 of his buddies to do the same. The police investigated, searched the house and caught Dave red-handed with boatloads of substances in his home as well as counterfeit bills and a ton of other illegal stuff. Dave was charged, denied bail and ended up pleading guilty to all the charges laid against him. His sentence was definitely heavy, at least 15 years. To add to that, Dave owed a lot of money to a lot of people and let's just say his time in prison was made much worse by this fact. My dad never spoke to him again, his parents disowned him, his girlfriend dumped him, he struggled to get a job with his record and when he got out he had to move miles away as no one he knew wanted anything to do with him. My dad eventually recovered from his injuries, although you can still see various scars on his body from the beating he took. My grandfather never told anyone what he had done until my dad asked him about it when he got really ill in the early 1990s. Dave's life was ruined and out of the 5 who attacked my dad 3 ended up in prison later in life and 2 ended up dead due to crime. My grandfather passed away in the late 1990s and although my dad and him had their issues it could never be said he didn't look out for him when he needed it.